Remember, you can get in touch with our Fearsome Foursome by emailing clubdubpodcast@mail.com and through Twitter, using the hashtag @clubdubpodcast.
Welcome to the
Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Hi, I'm Rob Rose, and welcome to another episode of the Club Dub Football Podcast. This week, we're spending our time chatting about free agent winners and losers with the lack of any other NFL news. So let's throw over to PB, JB, and Aldrin and get on with the show. Welcome back, gents.
Good evening, Rob.
So in a week where the biggest NFL news is that Le'Veon Bell seems just as angry that he hasn't been signed as the anger that people should expect him to have signed, but he isn't, we're going to drift off into our own territory and have some fun all of our own by picking free agent winners and losers from this off-season. Now, before we get into this tumultuous topic, we're going to throw over to you, PB, because as usual, you can kick us off with Quiz of the Week.
Welcome to Phil's Quiz of the Week.
Absolutely. Got a bumper quiz for you this week, which goes against our topic for this week. So I've done a little bit of digging into NFL stats records. So I've got 10 questions for you. Kicking us off, literally, question number 1. Who kicked the longest punt in NFL or AFL history? So number 1, longest punt in NFL or AFL history. Number 2, no Googling, Aldrin. Number 2, how long was the punt? So the longest punt in NFL or AFL history, who was it by? Question 1. How long was it? Question 2.
Yeah, I'm not Googling. I'm just typing into a Word document. Longest punt, no idea.
Rob said the questions were too easy last week, so I've mixed it up a bit this week. Number 3. Who threw the longest ever pass attempt in NFL history? So not necessarily a completed pass, but it's been recorded as the longest, as in most yards, attempt in NFL history. Question number 4. How long was this pass attempt? So how many yards was this recorded as being thrown? For the benefit of all the Club Dub podcast listeners, there's steam coming out of all of our other hosts' ears as they feverishly try to work out these answers. Many a furrowed brow on the podcast tonight. Question number 5. 2 players hold the record for the longest run in NFL history at 99 yards. Who are they? You have half a point for each. Question number 6. How long was the longest kickoff return in NFL history? Question number 7. Who took it to the house for a touchdown? So the longest kickoff return in NFL history, who took that ball and ran it all the way in for a touchdown?
Hey, one I'm actually confident on.
Question number 8. Similar theme. How long was the longest punt return in NFL history? The longest punt return in NFL history. How long was it? How many yards? Question number 9. Who was responsible for taking that? Oh, I nearly gave the game away there. Who was responsible for taking that return in for a touchdown? And rounding us out with question number 10. Who kicked the longest field goal in NFL history? And how long was it? So again, half a point for each there. Feel free to tweet us, drop us a message on Instagram, email, let us know how you did.
Right, I'm looking at a mixed bag of results here. I've just got certain questions with question marks against them, which obviously means I didn't know, but I've got a few.
Okay, so here we go then. Here we go. Who kicked the longest punt in NFL or AFL history?
So this, have you got this, JB?
I've written Ray Guy.
Wrong.
No, it's the end over end. It's Steve O'Neill, isn't it?
It's got to
Wow.
be in Denver, surely. Wherever
It was.
That's great knowledge.
Okay.
Jets, I think.
Steve
And it's
O'Neill
the
of the
famous.
New
You
York
see it a
Jets.
lot on Facebook. It's the end over end one that just keeps bouncing and rolling.
So it's Steve O'Neill of the New York Jets in 1969 versus the Denver Broncos at Mile High Stadium. That's good knowledge from both of you there.
I wrote no idea, somewhere in Denver.
You don't get a point for that. Rob gets the point for Steve O'Neill.
Fair enough.
So question 2 was, how long was this punt?
69 yards.
If I have 5 guesses, I reckon I could get it right.
Yeah, unfortunately, you only get one.
Oh, in which case I don't fancy my chances.
So have a guess, Rob.
My guesses would be 94 yards, 95 yards, 96 yards, 97 yards, 98 yards, or 99 yards. It's one of those, I think. But yeah.
Pin it down.
It was
Pin your
proper.
flag
It
to
was
the mast.
proper end-to-end stuff, though.
Pin your flag to the mast. Give us a guess.
I kind of want to go 99 because I suppose that's 99.
Wrong. JB, you said 69, didn't you? Just as a bounce guess, I suppose. Also
Haven't
wrong.
seen it.
Aldrin?
I don't know. 92.
Oh, no, Rob was closest. No points, though. I'm not that generous. 98 yards it was. Boom. So Rob's flying high at the moment with 1 point from 2 questions.
Nice.
Number 3, who threw the longest ever pass attempt in NFL history?
Now, can I have a guess? Because I think this was like last year, wasn't it? Was it Baker Mayfield's Hail Mary?
It was Baker touchdown maker. Monday, December the 14th, 2020 versus James's favourite, the Baltimore Ravens.
Ravens, yeah.
So question 4 is, how long was that pass attempt?
It was something like 65 or 70 yards, something like that. He was so far back. Something like
So
that.
I got Baker right, but I said 78 yards for how long it was.
78 yards is wrong. Aldrin, you going to guess?
I want to say like, I don't know, 71.
71 yards is also wrong. Rob?
Well, I would only be guessing a number because now I know it's Baker Mayfield. I remember the attempt, but
That's fine. The number
I
is
feel
the
like-
fourth question. So
I don't know.
Mayfield was the answer to 3.
65 yards.
Aldrin was closest there. It's actually 70 yards. So it's from the Cleveland 40, from the
What
Cleveland
yard out?
40 to the back of the end zone. And it resulted in Ravens safety Chuck Clark crashing into a goalpost as he didn't realise the ball was in the back of the end zone. It's a
Wow.
funny
I can't
clip.
believe you won't. I can't believe you will not afford me 1 yard.
Well, join the club, Aldrin.
No.
Join the club. See question 2 for details.
I was told I was too easy last week, so, you know. Right, question the 5th. Question number 5. Half a point for each here. The 2 players who hold the record for the longest run in NFL history at 99 yards.
I think I know.
Derek Henry's one.
Yeah.
Derrick
Derrick
Henry
Henry.
against the Jags.
Correct, in 2018.
Every year against the Jags, just put
Yeah.
9+ yards.
Who was first?
I'll have a guess.
Go for it.
Tony Dorsett.
Tony Dorsett is correct for them boys, the Dallas Cowboys, versus the Minnesota Vikings in 1982.
I'm going to say stood for ages, didn't it? That one?
Half a point for each there. Anyone get both?
No,
I got Derek.
Rob, good
Yep.
work. So half a point, JB and Aldrin. Question number 6. How long was the longest kickoff return in NFL history?
109 yards.
109 yards is correct. And question 7, who took it to the house?
Your little favourite, Cordarrelle Patterson.
Cordarrelle Patterson, correct, for the Vikings in a rivalry match against the Packers in 2013. Pow. Number 8. How long was the longest punt return in NFL history?
101.
I went for 100.
Both good guesses. Rob?
Obviously, I'd gone for 100, but can I say like 98 now that you've told them they're good guesses, but
You
wrong?
can say that, but you're going
Okay.
in the wrong direction. It was actually 103 yards. And who was responsible, question number 9, for taking that 103-yard return to the house?
See, this plays into my wheelhouse because this is before you guys followed the NFL, I think.
I was going to say, oh, okay.
Now-
in that
now-
case, my
does it-
Patrick Peterson is not correct then.
Well, no, I think if I didn't know this name, that would be criminal, Phil. Am I along the right lines?
Maybe.
No one else?
I had Devin Hester, so I'm probably wrong as well.
I think it's the Rams.
It is the Rams.
Yeah, so it's Rob Bailey.
It is Robert Bailey indeed for the Los Angeles Rams against the New Orleans Saints in 1994.
Listeners won't understand the relevance, But yeah,
I mean, they
I
might understand half of it because like Rob is your name as well. They are
you
aware
start
of
every
that.
episode by going, "Hi, I'm Rob Rose." So,
but I don't tend to talk about my children's names on the podcast.
oh, I didn't get that bit. Okay, I thought you were just referencing.
Come on.
Yeah.
Oh, come on, Phil. Yeah.
Oh, Rob also has a daughter called Bailey. Hence, I don't know if they, connection. Rob, was she named after the surname of the famous punt returner?
I'm feeling probably not.
No, she was named by her mother. So not a story I can necessarily complete for you, Phil.
Anyway,
All of this is getting cut.
Question number 10. Rounding us out. Anybody set for a full house if they get this? I wonder.
No,
Not even close. But I know this one.
Who kicked the longest field goal in NFL history, and how long was it? Half a point for each.
It's
Matt
Prater.
Prater, 64.
I said 64 as well.
And it was
Rob?
in Denver, obviously.
See, no, obviously with him being a Cardinal, I'd gone Prater. I went 63, but 64 sounds pretty good now. I've heard
It was Prater 64 in
Yeah.
Denver.
So what do I get? Half a point.
And there we have it. So how did you do, boys? What's your scores? Scores on the doors. Aldrin, I'll come to you first.
I got a solid 4.5, seeing as you've been stingy and wouldn't let me have points for just Denver and and 1 out. So
4.5 out of 10. Not bad going. JB.
I also got 4.5.
4.5. I feel Rob's going to come in with a big one here to win the quiz today. Rob, what did you get?
It's 4.5 again.
So you have literally all scored 4.5 out of 10. Hang on.
Dang,
I'm going to need to get a quiz tiebreaker.
oh, we don't need a
come on.
tiebreaker,
You
do we?
need a tiebreaker. Nicole Kidman, what's the tiebreaker? I'm not going to get you to dance with a coconut or pass a coconut amongst yourselves. Anyway, watch the film. It's a great film. Anyone listening at home, watch the film.
Thanks for listening. That was Phil's quiz of the week.
Right. So after I don't know, I feel like that was an odd quiz because I feel like I got loads of stuff other people didn't get, but obviously the reverse must also have been true if we all ended up level. So you know what, all good fun.
Odd. I'm not having that. It's a good
Between us, we've got pretty deep.
We'd make a good
where
quiz team.
we end. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
we'd make a good quiz team. Yeah, that's where we end with that. I mean, I'm not sure the host is necessary, but you know, who doesn't love the internet, right, Phil? So with another quiz in the bag, it's time to talk about our free agent winners and losers. 4 of us on the pod, 1 suggestion each. So Aldrin, in true podcast fashion, you get to kick us off. Who do you think from this off season is your free agent winner and loser, and why?
So I went for a loser, and the player that I've gone for is Hunter Henry. And I just think he's really missed a trick not sticking around with the Chargers, just because obviously they've got a really young, exciting quarterback who's now, got a year under his belt, that bit more experienced. But I mean, Herbert's got all of the physical traits to be an absolute top level quarterback. And I think he really misses a trick because he would have been an integral part of that offense. He was a really good safety blanket for Herbert last year. And I think that would have continued with that kind of rapport that they've already built into this year. Going to a situation in New England where, I mean, I've said enough over the last few weeks. I'm really not sold on the quarterback situation there. I think, we talked earlier about some of the footage coming out of the New England camp of Cam missing end zone targets left, right and centre. Now, obviously, we're only at OTAs and I'm not exactly massively concerned about any quarterback's performance at this stage because it's all nice and easy without all that kind of pressure. But I just feel like you probably got a bit more of a tumultuous quarterback situation there. It's probably going to be Cam to start, but then, are they going to bring in Mac Jones? Is there going to be that uncertainty about who's going to be under center? And regardless of whoever's under center, I think he's in a worse position because I don't think any of those quarterbacks are up to the same scratch as Herbert. Add to that, he's now going to be competing with Jonnu Smith for red zone targets. And I think you've probably seen enough over the last year or two to suggest that Jonnu Smith is probably the better red zone target. You know, he's a bigger, more physical presence in the end zone, and he's done really well at nabbing touchdowns over the last couple of years in Tennessee. So I just feel like, I mean, certainly from a financial standpoint, he's going in very happy, I'm sure, on a $35 million deal, I think. But I just think he's, ended up in a much worse situation than where he was with the Chargers. And I just think the outlook looks a lot worse for the future years. Whereas if he'd stayed in with the Chargers organization, he would have had a really good opportunity. Well, like we've said, probably to, try and push for the Super Bowl in the next couple of years. So I just feel like it was a move maybe motivated by money. I know he's said all the right things about, wanting to be a patriot and come with that patriot mentality. But ultimately, I think, he had a real opportunity to be tight end number one in a really exciting dynamic offense, and goes to fighting for tight end number one spot in a much more murky situation. So I just think he does himself a disservice.
If you think about the Patriots, and I don't think you can necessarily call them losers when they end up with two. I mean, Hunter Henry, I know, hasn't been the most durable in recent years, but two very good tight ends. The weird thing for me about the Patriots is it didn't necessarily feel like tight end was a kind of red zone option for them last year. One of the few genuine advantages of having Cam Newton was when you're inside the 5-yard line, that guy can still really produce and really run well in short yardage situations. And you kind of look back, and I mean, obviously there's a great history with Belichick and the Patriots with tight ends, admittedly, like all of the positive history with the Patriots very much tied to Tom Brady as well. But you look at what they did with Gronk. I mean, even when they had tight ends like Ben Watson, you feel that there's been a good game plan for those types of players in the past. But yeah, the big point you make is just undeniable, isn't it? I mean, unless there is a really significant shift in the way they play the game of football, surely they've spent their money on an embarrassment of riches in what feels like not necessarily the key position. I mean, I don't know. I was imagining with all of the things going on at quarterback, whether it was Mac Jones, whether it was Cam Newton, that they were going to be very much built around run, whether it was Cam Newton or a true running game. I suppose tight ends are a necessary component there with their blocking skill. But yeah, I mean, it does seem odd, and particularly odd for Henry. I mean, when you're coming off injuries as a young player, I would want to be a target for your team, somebody in offenses, if not built around. I think maybe that's a little bit odd to build around a tight end in the modern NFL, but just to feel a bit more relevant. We might be looking in a couple of years at the kind of situation that has befallen a couple of other less durable tight ends. Tyler Eifert springs to mind, a guy who all of a sudden, may never find his way back. And let's hope better's ahead for Hunter Henry.
Yeah, I was kind of listening just to Aldrin and you talk about it and kind of thinking, if you look like historically at teams that have had the most success with two tight end sets, the New England Patriots are probably at the top of that list, at least kind of in recent years. I think Josh McDaniel especially is talented at kind of scoping up plays to get players in space and use them for their strengths. Like we keep coming back to every time we talk about the Patriots, though, this isn't the same Patriots. You don't have Tom Brady distributing the ball. And you saw last season with his connection with Gronk and how that came in towards the end of their Super Bowl run, that maybe it's just as much the quarterback getting the ball to the players as it is the players executing the plan as it's been drawn out. Say what you will about Cam, say what you will about Mac Jones and Brian Hoyer and Jared Stidham, kind of the four options in New England. And like Cam's had great success in his time in Carolina with Greg Olsen, another absolutely class quality tight end. But again, we're not talking about that same Cam. And what is the New England offense going to look like? Who's going to be put in charge of the engine and running it? Is it going to be Newton? Is it going to be Jones? Is it going to be inexplicably, Brian Hoyer? Who, if it's Jones, you've then got a rookie not just trying to learn a scheme, but you've got a rookie trying to learn the NFL at the same time whilst playing in two tight ends. And yeah, a tight end is a rookie quarterback's best friend, but you have to look at the situation and kind of think, there was probably, if he could have stayed in Los Angeles, there was probably more there for him.
I think your point's spot on when it comes to QB. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm completely off with this. I think QB is the problem with success at tight end for New England. You know, New England pick up Andy Dalton, let's say, in the offseason, instead of him going to the Bears. I would feel far better about Andy Dalton under center than any of the names you've just mentioned. I think Cam is beyond his best considerably. I saw nothing last year beyond short yardage running that made me think he was a viable option. Jones, Stidham, Hoyer, surely not. I feel about the Patriots, I feel very much the way I feel about the Broncos. Just go and get somebody. You know, there's talent elsewhere on that roster. Just go and be aggressive. And maybe I'll look back and go, well, they were aggressive. They went and got Mac Jones. But he's the hope for me because I think everyone else has a very obvious ceiling in that quarterback room.
Yeah, agreed.
I think my initial reaction was to definitely agree with, you know, my right honourable friend Aldrin, that Hunter Henry would have would have downgraded going from the Chargers to the Patriots. They have, you know, a good young quarterback prospect. They've got an exciting offense. You know, they've got some players back on defense that they didn't have last year, like Derwin James, for example, who's going to be back this year, who missed all of last season. So, you know, they've got the potential to be a better team. But you can never count out the Patriots, can you really? I mean, last year they had a sucky season, but, you know, a couple of close games that they lost here and there, and they could have turned into a playoff team. They've got some playmakers back this year. So Hightower's back this year as example. They've made, you know, a little bit of a splash in free agency. So I don't know. It could, you know, it could work out for the best for him, and he could be one of those reasons why. You know, the Patriots have always had a strong offense around, you know, throwing to tight ends. If you think of Gronk and predecessors to Gronk that I probably won't name, you know, that's been a cornerstone of their offense. So I don't know. I wouldn't count them out. You know, it's a tough division. The Bills are going to be good. The Finns are probably going to be good, but then, you know, the story fresh in the mind of Tua throwing 5 picks at mini camp the other day. So you don't know with them. So it's going to be a tough one, but I could see it going either way with them. So I think I'm going to, my initial reaction was to blazingly agree with you, but I think I'm going to sit on the fence on this one and say, actually, it could work out.
Look back at the history of the league. Look at league MVPs over the last 30 years and tell me how many of those league MVPs are quarterback. The quarterback sets your ceiling. And for me, I think Hunter Henry and Jonas Smith are great tight ends. Cam Newton, Mac Jones, Brian Hoyer, Jared Stidham are your problem. You know, they set what's possible from the players around them, just like I think Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater do to a degree in Denver and a few other franchises besides. I mean, it feels like a sandwich bet type. So I cannot see the Patriots being relevant. And I actually think, you know, everyone's like, well, it's the Patriots. They find a way. They didn't. We watched them last year and they didn't. And they've brought back people in Cam Newton who limit their ability to improve in my eyes. I think the Patriots need to be careful. I think, you know, is it a level of arrogance that they don't feel they need to go out and get somebody? But equally, you know, it all comes down to Mac Jones. I have very little faith in, but if that guy was to spark, like we saw Herbert do, or like we've seen a number of rookie quarterbacks do over the years, if he was to spark, that team comes together very quickly because there are good pieces around him. But yeah, I'm not as on the fence. I think you're right, Aldrin. I think Hunter Henry is in danger of being quite an anonymous presence in the NFL next season in that team, because I think he's probably the 6th, 7th best tight end in the league, and he starts as the 2nd best tight end on a pretty average team, but maybe we'll be proved wrong. So, great start, which means PB, you are up. Give us a winner or loser in NFL free agency. Who have you gone for and why?
So I've gone for... I've actually gone for someone who was traded rather than a free agent.
We'll allow it.
Yeah.
Yeah, fine, good. So my initial reaction is Julio Jones, because I think he's gone from a team with no hope of making a playoff push, no hope of a Super Bowl, to a team that you arguably say he could push them to be a Super Bowl contender. I think we had a lot of discussion around them last week, didn't we, around whether it makes them any different. And I know that I did say I don't actually think it makes them, I don't think it pushes them any further than the 2-punch that they had last year. So on a team basis, I don't think they're that much stronger. However, for Julio himself, he's put himself in a great situation. He's going to be playing playoff games next year. They're going to get out of that division, whether it's themselves or the Colts that win the division. They'll both make the playoffs, I think, barring, a big injury to Derrick Henry, who plays a big part in their offense. But yeah, I think it's going to be a win for Julio. I think it makes him stronger. I think it almost might make him a better player next season, because you kind of, it's whetting his appetite a little bit again. He's maybe a bit, jaded. He's had some dodgy injuries, and, they've had a couple of losing seasons now in Atlanta. So going to a team, with a kind of thriving offense, a successful team over the past couple of years, couple of playoff appearances, probably the best running back in the league. I think that's something that's really going to drive him on. So yeah, I reckon Julio's a winner of this offseason for me.
I'm in agreement with you on, I think, pretty much everything there, on Julio landing in Tennessee and Tennessee improving his chances of getting to the playoffs, and kind of that assessment of the Falcons. Kind of in our pre-pod discussion, I kind of said one of my winners that I was considering was also a Falcon, but weirdly enough, I'd gone Alex Mack moving from Atlanta to San Francisco. And I think one of the important things to kind of say from where I'm coming from is, just because we're talking about a player whose prospects are necessarily getting better or worse, it doesn't necessarily mean it's an indictment of the previous team. It just means where they are landed is slightly better for them. I think the Falcons have still got a good team. I think they are just a team that maybe can't decide if they're rebuilding or if they're reloading, because taking Kyle Pitts at the position that they took him at indicated to me that they were reloading for another run. Pairing him up with Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley gives them an explosive air attack. But then trading Julio Jones kind of says, well, are you trying to move players on to then rebuild? And it just feels a lot like maybe the Falcons haven't decided just what they want to do right now. And when we've seen teams unable to make that decision before, it's come back and cost them. It's great for Jones, because Jones is out of that confusion and out of any potential rebuild, and in a team that is, I think, definitely still on the rise.
I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit on this, just because I don't disagree with you, Phil. In fairness, I think Tennessee is a much better position for him to be in, purely because they've got much more chances of getting to the playoffs and going a bit further in the playoffs. On a personal level, though, if you'd asked him to pick what organization he would have wanted to land in as a wide receiver, I don't think Tennessee would have been that first team that you would pick, purely because if you're going from catching passes from Matt Ryan, you're not ending up in a better situation in Tennessee, are you? Let's be honest. I mean, I think we all agree Ryan Tannehill's outperformed himself, and Tennessee will be amazed with how well he's kind of turned into their franchise quarterback. But if you're not going to catch an awful lot of passes from the guy, he's handing the ball off to Derrick Henry an awful lot. So I don't disagree with you in the sense that he goes into an organization that's got a much clearer path of where they want to go and have got a much better chance of making the playoffs and going further. But on a personal note, I think there were a couple of teams that when he was on the trade block, he would have preferred to be traded to, just because he's going to get better numbers. He's going to get more of a central point in the offense, rather than just being what I would amount to probably being a wide receiver 2 in a run heavy offense. So that would be my only counter to it, but I don't disagree he's in a better situation where he is now.
I think there's some really interesting stuff in there. JB, I think your most interesting point there is about the Falcons. I think you're right. I think it's very hard for a team to commit to rebuild when you have a quarterback like Matt Ryan. When you have a guy who's coming probably towards the end of his career, maybe not at the very end, but could potentially be, say, 3 years away from the end. It's a big decision to decide to rebuild without truly starting again. I think they're looking at this year thinking, well, let's see how we do. We might, under a new head coach, we might surprise ourselves. A bit like the Chargers, actually, last season. You wonder how many games were lost due to poor coaching, a bit like Lynn at the Chargers. But actually, the other point for me is there's a really interesting comparison here between the Tennessee Titans and the New England Patriots. I mean, you picked it up, Aldrin. They've got Ryan Tannehill. He's hardly a superstar, but actually he's a perfectly serviceable, pretty accurate quarterback, given good situations around him, given good time in the pocket, not asked to do too much, given good weapons. And it only makes me even more frustrated about your initial point about the Patriots. Like I say, you put Andy Dalton in that quarterback room, I would feel very different about the Patriots. I think they limit themselves in that way. Julio Jones undoubtedly in a better situation. I think they could do interesting things. But your last point was the big point for me, Aldrin. They're still run first. Two great wide receivers at that team. I still think they're run first. But let's see how far they could go. Good shout, actually, PB. I wondered quite how that would flesh out. But actually, the more I think about it, I think you're right. If we're thinking about individual players winning and losing, Julio Jones is definitely one who gets an uptick. So after that, does that mean we're coming to me? So if your Julio Jones one is a bit off the wall, I think mine's probably equally odd. Because I think until you bear with me and hear me make my argument, it doesn't entirely make sense from a first listen. My winner is Mitchell Trubisky. And actually, the win that I'll give you is not only Mitchell Trubisky, but also the Buffalo Bills.
Can I just interrupt you, Rob? Make sure you add a pause for laughter in there, okay?
Well, I love the fact I said you have to give me time to flesh out my idea, and you do that.
I can't wait to see where this is going.
So here's where it's going, right? Let's look at teams in Super Bowl windows, right? So not the Bills, but let's pick some from the last few years. Let's pick the Saints. Let's pick the Eagles. Let's pick the Chiefs. Let's pick a number of teams. The Rams would be another one. Let's pick teams who are in Super Bowl windows and think about how many of those teams over recent seasons have relied in part on a backup quarterback. Whether it's been Drew Brees out for the Saints, whether it's been Matt Moore coming in and actually post Matt Moore, Chad Henne. I think that getting Mitchell Trubisky for $1 million for the season for the Bills is good business. Because is he Josh Allen? No. But he's a guy who can play in a similarly set up offense. A guy who's got good mobility. A guy who ultimately, made the playoffs and is serviceable as a starting quarterback should you need him. Then I look at the Buffalo Bills and go, Josh Allen, who I have seen dive headfirst to make first downs probably more than any other player in the NFL in the last 3 years, let alone any other quarterback. I think to imagine that Josh Allen will go the whole season next season without having to come out of a game, without having to miss games is unlikely. And previously the Bills were left with Matt Barkley. Here's the thing about Mitchell Trubisky. If you have to put Mitch Trubisky in, do I think that Mitch Trubisky could win you a playoff game? Probably. I think with the good coaching around him, with the talent around him, with all the things going on in Buffalo that seem to be moving in such a positive direction, I think without Josh Allen, Mitchell Trubisky is $1 million really well spent. So from a Buffalo Bills point of view, just winning all day long, paying that guy so little to fill what could be such an important role. Then you look at Mitchell Trubisky and go, well, look, he wasn't about to get a starting job anywhere. Nobody was going to put him under center next season and build their franchise or their game plan around Mitchell Trubisky. A bit like, I've got to be honest, the Ryan Tannehill example when he went to Tennessee a couple of years ago. Ryan Tannehill went to Tennessee thinking, you know what? if I end up with an opportunity in a well-run franchise with a good supporting cast, I feel I could do something. And actually, famously, Tannehill's agent came out and said that, didn't he? I think he said, we looked at places he could get an opportunity to actually bump himself from off the bench to on the field. And we looked at what teams, if that opportunity came calling, could give Ryan a chance to be successful. Mitchell Trubisky is the most bizarre of NFL quarterbacks in that we're talking about a quarterback who played playoff football last season that seemingly no one in the league rates. I think Mitchell Trubisky gives himself the best possible chance to be a relevant NFL player in future by backing up somebody like Josh Allen. Somebody who, if he comes in and gets his chance, has great players around him, well schemed. And again, he's mobile enough to do some of what Allen does. Not as good as Allen does it, but that's why he's only been paid $1 million. But I think, again, Mitchell Trubisky and his agent should actually take a bow. That guy might only be on $1 million and he might have got 3, 4, 5 million to back up somebody else elsewhere. But he has just given himself half a chance of a long NFL career by making what I think is a very smart football move.
So we record our podcast every week on a meeting client that I think Phil's already mentioned the name of it, but just in case I won't hear. And listeners, if you could have seen the reaction from the three of us when Rob said Mitchell Trubisky, I think it was terrible. And then Rob, you laid out your reasoning there, and you've kind of swayed me to it. We have said when we've been watching Red Zone and things like that together that Josh Allen is one of those quarterbacks that you just think is gonna injure himself at some point. He's not necessarily prone to sliding. He likes to kind of power through and get everything that he can, and that will probably catch up and cost him one day. And yeah, kind of the Bills need to make sure they have an experienced person to step in and kind of take the reins for a game or two, because that's really what your backup quarterback is there for. He's not there to step in and save the day and turn into a franchise quarterback. Yes, that's what happened with, sorry to mention him again, but Tom Brady or people like that. You're just there, Matt Moore, Chad Henne being the examples that you've given as what you want. A guy who can come in, run the offense, not sort of minimize mistakes, not wreck everything for the team, and then move on. I think Trubisky gets a bit of a knock because of his career in Chicago. It's not necessarily his fault that the Bears traded up to get him at 2 when there were other people available. And yes, for a lot of people, the memory that you have of him is kind of the field parting like Moses parted the Red Sea, and a Bears player absolutely wide open in the end zone that he didn't notice for a potential game-winning touchdown. But he's still got the potential. He's won games before. He's not a terrible pick by any means and by any stretch of the imagination. So if the Bills are picking him up as just an insurance cover, yeah, I think he's got a better chance of being successful there than he has with the Bears, which was kind of the point of this exercise. And yeah, I'm kind of on the Trubisky train.
So is your point, Rob, basically that it's been a strong off-season for Trubisky because he's in a better backup opportunity with the Bills than he would be a better backup opportunity elsewhere? I suppose that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around, because I don't think he's going to get, I don't think he'll start a game for the Bills. I don't see Allen missing game time. And I know that, he could blow out his knee in week 1. You never know, do you? It's a total risk. But I don't think going there and backing up is going to make, give Mitchell Trubisky any better career prospects than he already had. Do you know what I mean? So if he comes in, if it happens, if he comes in and he plays a game and he looks good, then maybe someone will take a punt on him elsewhere. But we're kind of just saying it's worked out for him because he's backing up a potential Super Bowl contender. He could win a Super Bowl by riding the pine. I'm not sure I'm on board with that.
So that is not my point at all. My point is not Mitchell Trubisky can win a Super Bowl, right? Scrub that. My point is, look at how many Super Bowl contenders over the years have had a month without their starting quarterback and needed to go 2-2, right? They needed to just ride it out. I think the Saints with Bridgewater, and then actually more notably last season, I suppose with Taysom Hill would be an example. I know they didn't go on to win the Lombardi, but My point is Mitchell Trubisky. So let's take your first challenge, Phil. Mitchell Trubisky wasn't starting anywhere. So Mitchell Trubisky's options were backup across the board. No one's paying him to be a starter. He could have probably earned more money by going elsewhere because a decent backup, this guy played a playoff game last year. He could have been taking $4 million. You can't see Josh Allen missing time. I can see Josh Allen losing an arm the way he plays football. I can see him, that guy just plays with a reckless abandon that does not keep you off the injury list. It really doesn't. And what I'm saying is, if you're going to get a spot, that small amount of time to prove yourself in the spotlight, where better to do it at somewhere like Buffalo, where they play how you like to play. They use your mobility. They use a nice balance of run and pass, and they're able to make things happen with the way they scheme. That, for me, is why Trubisky's in the right place. He could be $3 million richer, but I think he'd be cutting his NFL career 3 or 4 years shorter than the decision he's ended up taking. That was my point.
I'm going to pick on one of the things that you mentioned, Rob, as the biggest counter to Phil's commentary that the situation he finds himself in now doesn't enhance his career prospects. Look at Teddy Bridgewater. That guy was a £1 million backup for a couple of years in New Orleans, played 3 or 4 games fairly serviceably. He looks like he could still play. He could move the chains, but nothing super splash, nothing special. I mean, look at his career prospects. The guy got picked up as a starter in Carolina and more than likely Denver, and has been paid pretty handsomely to do it. So I think being a backup in a good situation does enhance your career prospects. Certainly as a quarterback, if you show that you can be serviceable, there's always a quarterback needy team that is going to call on you and pay you $10, $15 million to go and be a starter for a year before they find the guy. So I certainly class Mitch Trubisky in that bracket. Like you said, Rob, the guys played playoff football and wasn't the reason they didn't win that game, in my opinion. I don't think he was massively to blame for any terrible performances. He looked fairly serviceable. He could play as a starter. So I certainly think the situation he finds himself in does enhance his career prospects and enhances his chances of being in a team that could well and should make a decent run in the playoffs. And like you said, Rob, Josh Allen, I think we all loved the way he played last year and he looked phenomenal. But equally, he does put himself in situations where he's going to get hit. It's easy for a quarterback to miss 2 or 3 games. And if Mitch Trubisky comes in and they go 2-1 or 3-0 in Josh Allen's absence, then I think Mitch Trubisky does himself a world of good. I think he finds himself in a good situation with some good wide receivers there now. They've got Stephon Diggs. They picked up Emmanuel Sanders, didn't they? Who's always a great safe pair of hands. So, if you want to go into a situation that's going to put you back in the shop window, like we said, nobody's paying him starting money this year and he was never going to get that opportunity. So picking a good organization to go and be a backup in was a smart move for me. Plus, equally, I know he gets a bad rap purely because of where he was drafted, but I don't think he's a bad quarterback. I think we've seen worse, and there are worse starters going into the league this year. I think Drew Lock is probably the one that I would pick out. There are worse quarterbacks that are going in as the presumptive starter of their organizations this year. So, I think if he gets an opportunity and does well, certainly next year somebody's paying him $10, $15 million like Andy Dalton is at the Cowboys.
In terms of that, so we're talking about Mitch Trubisky being paid $1 million. Andy Dalton next season will be paid $10 million by the Bears. Teddy Bridgewater will be paid $11.5 million by the Broncos. Taysom Hill, $12 million by the Saints. And even if you go to the second or third choice QBs in a number of teams, so if I take, for instance, Case Keenum at the Browns, $6 million, Tyrod Taylor at the Texans, $5.5 million. It's one of those things that you start to look at some of these numbers. Marcus Mariota, $4 million to be paid to sit on the roster of the Raiders. I'm not saying that Mitchell Trubisky is somehow going to turn into an NFL superstar and they're going to put his face on lunchboxes. I'm telling you that guy could have got more money elsewhere, but I think he's made a very smart decision. He's on a 1-year deal. if he does spark, as we're now talking about, and he has one good game, maybe he plays a Monday night or Sunday night football, and leads them in a fourth quarter drive. I think he's just extended an NFL career. And I think just one or two good games could actually change the view of him, could make him feel a little less like damaged goods and maybe like a guy who's still young enough to think he might have a second wind and might just fit in a system somewhere. Do I think he, was able to achieve anything better? No. I think he could have been greedier, but I think he's been smart. And I think ending up in an organization like the Bills is a very, very smart move. So that means there's only one left, JB. You get to convince me who your free agency winner or loser is. Take it away.
Well, gentlemen, across the wide tapestry of sports and entertainment, there have been many successful Kennys. Kenny Rogers, Hall of Fame country music recording artist. Kenny Dalglish, English and Scottish Hall of Fame football or soccer, for some of our international listeners, player. And this year, in this season's free agency, Kenny Golladay, for me, was probably the pick of the wide receivers, with all due respect to current Arizona Cardinal, AJ Green. And Golladay landing at the Giants, moving from the Lions, kind of feels a little bit like a loss to me. Not necessarily because his prospects have got dramatically worse, but because I think they could have got better. This is more of a lateral move rather than an up or a down kind of thing. Golladay and Stafford, I think, had good connection when Golladay was fit and when they could link up, and you definitely kind of got that vibe of if they'd managed to persuade Calvin Johnson to carry on, eventually getting to the point where you had Megatron on one side and Starscream on the other side, you kind of would have had a Lions offense that you would fit. Never happened. And obviously Stafford has now moved on into hopefully successful career for the Rams. Goff, I don't think is Stafford. I think we have talked about this before. And I think a lot of people are kind of looking at Sean McVay and the Rams moving on from Jared Goff as a sign that maybe Goff isn't that top tier, top caliber quarterback that everybody was looking for from the number one pick. But moving from kind of a Jared Goff offense to a Daniel Jones offense, how much kind of difference is there between the two? And yes, we can talk about kind of the other successes that the Giants have got. They've picked up Kyle Rudolph from the Vikings. They've got Saquon Barkley coming back and looking sort of fit and absolutely raring to go and prove he's the player that everybody thinks that he is. But much like the point I made when we were talking about the New England Patriots, it all comes down to the quarterback. And you have to ask yourself the question, is Daniel Jones the kind of quarterback that can help get the most out of a player like Kenny Golladay? Personally, no. I don't think we've seen enough from Daniel Jones kind of over the years to really show he's someone that can consistently run an offense and can consistently feature a quality target like Golladay. And you kind of have to think if there were other options out there. Again, put Golladay on the Arizona Cardinals. So like pair him up with sort of Christian Kirk and Kyler Murray, and you've got to look at that and think that was a better potential landing spot than where he is now.
I'm going to disagree with you on this, because as much as I deride the Giants, and I still think they're a ways off, I think if you're talking about has he improved his situation over last year or staying where he was, then I think you have to say that he has improved his situation. I think we've talked about it a couple of weeks ago where, we've said that the Lions look like in a full rebuild mode and they're probably another year away. They're probably looking at writing off this year and jumping into next year when they've got a whole host of picks and, they can really kick on with the franchise. I think they've almost taking a year off in terms of they brought in Goff just to, move some things around and get some picks in. And I think they're a little way off. So I don't think, staying in Detroit was going to end positively for him this year. I certainly think the Giants offer a lot more. So I think I do think that they offer a lot more for his prospects this year. And I think if he can stay healthy, then although Daniel Jones isn't the complete package, like Rob said last week, the guy can throw a good deep ball. And having Golladay there offers a real good physical presence for him to be the guy coming down with touchdown passes. And I think he's got as good a chance as any to be, stretching the field and catching touchdown passes there as he is almost anywhere, because Daniel Jones can throw a good ball and they've got a good supporting cast around him. So while do I think he maybe could have landed in a better spot? Sure. But, if he'd wanted to take $4 million and land in Kansas City, then I think he would have done. But I think the guy wanted the $17 million that he's taken in New York and still lands in a fairly decent situation where, like we said last week, whilst the Giants could equally be the bottom of that division, they could just as easily be at the top of it. So I'm going to disagree with you on that one, JB. I think he's in a much better position than he was last year, put it that way.
I think JB's point in part centers around his position could have been even better than the Giants, doesn't it? And that I kind of get. But the only thing I would say is the only person who you blame for that is Kenny Golladay. Is Kenny Golladay. Because when you demand the kind of money he was demanding in a tight cap year, as we've discussed on this pod a number of times, the Cardinals have got like $500,000, in cap space. When he's demanding these huge sums of money, it was always going to be a limited number of teams. And also it was never going to be a superpower as such. Point about the Lions, I think I'll take it. It's very odd to not even talk about a team in rebuild, but a team who are clearly a year away from rebuilding. That's an odd situation because, like you say, it's almost, next year they're just stacking picks ready for next year. I suppose the way we saw the Dolphins do to an extent, but it is quite a rare case in point. The Jags maybe in the past have done it as well. But yeah, the thing for me is that, can I see Golladay being successful? Yes, I think Daniel Jones' strength and Golladay's strengths kind of meet somewhere. There's a kind of meeting of minds there that I could see working. But JB, to your point, yeah, I mean, I think the Giants are probably not the Super Bowl type contender that in a different year, in a different situation, Golladay might have found himself playing for. But I mean, there is a cautionary tale here. You've only got to look at the Cleveland Browns and Beckham Jr. and think, well, actually, where does guarantee you success? I think if you look on paper at teams like the Cleveland Browns in years gone by, as much as they definitely made a step last year, oddly without Beckham because of injury, but we've looked previously at these teams that stack themselves with talent, and I've got to be careful. The Cardinals could be one of these in the coming year, where for all the talent they add to the roster, it doesn't quite work. He's in a better situation than Detroit, so Aldrin, I agree with you. Could he have been in a better situation still? Yeah, JB, I kind of agree with you. I think there were other options that he might not have got the money, but he could have been nudging himself closer to a Lombardi.
Yeah, I think there are other options for Golladay that probably would have been better than being thrown to by Daniel Jones. I don't rate Daniel Jones. I think this might be his last season as a starting quarterback, unless he has a real step up from where he was last year. But as you've said before, Rob, you were probably saying the same thing about Josh Allen before this season, so who knows what's going to happen. But I don't know, it goes back to the division a little bit, in that it's such a poor division that they could just as easily make the playoffs and come out of it and win the division as they could come bottom and miss the playoffs. So it's hard to put a finger on it. Is it one that I'm going to sit on the fence again? Maybe, but like Aldrin said earlier, if you look at staying in Detroit with Goff versus going to the Giants, you could arguably say he's come out better. But if you look at it where he was last season, being thrown to by Stafford versus now being thrown to by Daniel Jones, I think it's a downgrade. So not a winner for me on this one.
You've got to fear a bit for Daniel Jones in a season where Mitchell Trubisky's only on a single-year deal in Buffalo and then will be an unrestricted free agent in 12 months' time, Phil. I think it's nice how you've stitched and meshed those points together. I'll convince you all that Mitchell Trubisky...
That one up, Rob.
No. And also, can I say, I actually think Jared Goff's a pretty smart piece of business for the Lions. I'm not that sold on Matthew Stafford, but there you go. Maybe he'll tear the NFC West up and leave the Cardinals, crying into their breakfast cereal. Who knows? I might end up eating those words. But gentlemen, what an absolutely stunning roundup of free agent winners and losers. 4 picks you wouldn't hear on any other podcast. And like I say, I'll just put your ridicule down to just ignorance and lack of creativity, Phil. That's how I'm going to sum that up. I think if I had more open-minded cohorts on this podcast, maybe I would have been able to get my point out before the laughter and interruption. But you know what? Time will tell. But gentlemen, if nothing happens in the NFL, we always find something fun to stick our teeth into. Shall we, keep an eye on the news and maybe do the same next week? Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Don't forget to send in your comments, any views, any requests for future podcasts. And don't forget to let us know how you did on Phil's Quiz of the Week this week. That's clubdubpodcast@mail.com.
Sounding needy now, Phil, but I like it.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.
The game is over. The game is over.
And I've no idea how long it was, but I feel like it was like
14th.
it was something like.
You're ruining my bit here, Aldrin.
Oh, go on then. You go nuts. Go on. Again, this is all getting cut. Good work.
Might make the outtakes. Here we go. Right. So, let us know how you did at home. Instagram, Twitter, email. What's the email, Rob? clubdub@gmail.com or something like that.
Stop saying nonsense. I have to cut it out.
I'm trying
clubdubpodcast@mail.com.
Let me recut it. So let us know how you did at home. Hit us up on Instagram, Twitter, or clubdubpodcast@mail.com.
24 weeks in and Phil doesn't know the email address. Good one.